Hey, everybody, welcome to the 7 Minute Workshop, during which we chat with experts to break down complicated or timely topics that actually affect your business. And we do it in just 7 minutes. And that is coincidentally the same amount of time it takes for my fully charged 3-year-old iPhone's battery to drain. And since I'm broadcasting this from that iPhone, maybe we should just get started. We are sticking to our theme of managing a hybrid workforce this entire month, and we'll cover what the transition to a hybrid workforce looks like, whether you've been operating from home over the past year and a half or figuring out how you're going to shift your in-office operations to include the opportunity to work from home. And hey, maybe you've already made the shift, but need some advice on some of these things. So we've got that for you too. To dive into this important topic, we'll be joined by NetSuite experts, Hanif Ismail, Vice President of Strategy and Product Management for NetSuite HCM, and Marc Holliday, our Senior Product Marketing Manager. They're going to provide suggestions on how to plan for a shift to a hybrid workforce, what that looks like for your employees, and how to track success. Of course, every business has to decide these things for themselves. Hanif and Marc are not legal experts. We're going to relegate the conversation to the things that businesses are discussing right now. A quick reminder as well, if you have questions throughout today's discussion, you can ask them in the comments and we'll get to them at the end of the conversation. And don't forget, like always, tell us where you're tuning in from. We know you're signing on from all parts of the world, and we'd love to give you a shout out right back. We had a ton last time. I don't even think we could get to them all. The other thing is, if you've already made the shift to a hybrid workforce, tell us how you've gone about it. Did people have a choice? Did you downsize office space or change the office configuration? Are there specific days or purposes for people coming in? Whatever you're doing, drop it in the comments and we'll relay that on air. We'd like to help people out with how you've done it as well. Okay, please join me in welcoming Hanif Ismail and Marc Holliday. Hey, Marc. Hey, Hanif. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, it's great to be back here with you, Fritz. Hello, Hanif.
Hey, Marc. Hey, Fritz. Great to be back again.
Okay, well, let's start with you, Marc. You touched on this during last week's workshop, but I think it's a really good starting point for today. What are the 3 models that we're seeing businesses consider in their return to the office?
Yeah, for those companies who made the decision to send their entire workforce or most of their workforce remotely 18 months ago, they're really looking at 3 different models. The first one is bringing everybody back in. The second one is allowing more remote work, but the third one seems to be the leading one. It's called a hybrid workforce where sometimes you're in the office and sometimes you're working from a remote location. And the one thing to keep in mind is it's not one size fits all when it comes to hybrid workforces. We've seen a couple of different approaches to it. One is a full week in the office and a full week out of the office. Other models include, 2 or 3 days in the office and 2 or 3 days working remotely. I think the most important thing is to, if you can, offer some flexibility to your employees. If the requirement is 3 days in the office, either let them choose what those 3 days are, or at least let them pick 1 or 2. I think that will go a long way in improving employee satisfaction with this new mode of work.
For sure, and it's a learning process all along. Hanif, what's the most critical thing in planning for that shift to this hybrid workforce?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the most critical, but I'll give you a couple of areas that I think are top of mind at least. One is, I personally think having clarity first on which roles are appropriate for a hybrid situation. And that's highly dependent on the industry you're in, your business strategy specifically as well. So as an example, if you're a hospitality staff member, as an example, or an employee, probably you need to be on site for the most time, right? Versus if you're a support desk person, or you're in consulting services staff member, you could do it remotely, or you could do it in a mixed situation, as Marc was talking about before, where I'm going to work partly from the house and I'm going to work partly from the office. We have a customer who's in real estate services business, and it's interesting the journey that they went through. Pre-pandemic, actually, they hired everybody locally within their vicinity because they want everybody to be physically present in the office. Then, of course, the pandemic occurred and the transition occurred, which is everybody went, generally speaking, everybody went remote, right? 100% remote in that situation. What they found from their experience was that they learned a lot from that. They weren't a believer in remote workforces before, and now they're a believer. They have a completely different mindset, and it's shifted. They now have access to much broader talent pool and with better cost efficiencies. The pandemic essentially now forced people to kind of rethink which jobs could actually be done effectively remotely. So I think having clarity on which jobs can be done remotely in your organization is a key step in your planning efforts. I think another one as part of that is developing a forecast. Essentially what I mean by that is kind of predicting, how many people are expected to work from the office based on those parameters that you put out. How many will work from the office? How many will work from home? And what sort of mixed situation will you be, home and office kind of thing? And in that situation, sometimes what customers I see are using, and the industry tends to be using, is sending out a survey to employees and asking them from their perspective. And it's interesting because I've seen a shift in this, but asking them from their perspective, what will make them more productive? It's a very different context. What will make you more productive? Working from home, working from the office, or doing, some from the office and some from work? It's interesting. I saw a center study recently, and it's a study that was done in 2021, so recently. And they went out and they surveyed, I think it was 9,000 people, workers around the world. And what they came back with was that 83% of workers say a hybrid model would be more optimal. And what that means is, I'm going to work a little bit from work and then on site, and then sometimes from home. So the forecast at the end of the day, when you collect all of this data, the forecast at the end of the day will help you plan out your real estate needs, your office requirements, right? It'll also help you with phasing the workforce as they return to the office as well, and determining the prioritization of that phasing as well.
Marc, Hanif just mentioned the office space situation, and I want to touch on that for a minute. How are businesses handling that in terms of a hybrid workforce?
Yeah, I think one of the first things people returning to work in this hybrid model are going to notice is it's a less dense area. Everything from the parking lot to the elevators to the actual physical workspace is going to be less dense because not as many people are going to be in the office in this hybrid model as they used to be. So what we're seeing is a lot of desk sharing. Sometimes we call it hoteling space, where just general areas of people to come in and work, but it's not necessarily their own desk. We've seen other companies develop workspaces by role. Being in the software industry, we know the development teams I've been around, they like the two monitors and low lighting. So having a specific area based on the role is some other things that we're seeing. And naturally, as they start to see the workforce come back in, a couple of things will also have to be kept in mind is I think there's going to have to be a visible evidence of sanitizing and cleaning the workspaces in terms of health and safety to make sure your employees feel safe in that environment. And then as Hanif mentioned, it's going to be natural once things are settled in after a couple of weeks or even just a couple months. I think a lot of companies will be asking themselves, how much physical space do we really need for our workforce?
Yeah, and I think a lot of companies are already sort of exploring that. And in terms of the cleanliness, we've all kind of gotten used to that, cleaning our environments or making sure that, we're being safe. So I figure, it's just going to carry on into the office. Hanif, once, you've put all these plans in place and you've made the shift, now we have a hybrid workforce model, whatever that may be. How do you manage that workforce? What are the issues that come up there?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I think the first thing I would say is, well, almost the first thing. One of the early things I would say is to really establish clear and equitable hybrid work policies. have them applied consistently to the degree you can. So no matter what their working model is. So as an example, time off policy, you should probably get the same number of vacation days, whether you're working from home or you're working from the office, right? You're putting in the same amount of effort, same amount of time, as an example. Looking at things like career path for opportunities, because that'll be on people's minds. Hey, if I do work remotely, does this mean my career path is limited? So looking at solutions for that and saying, how do we make that uniform, that your career isn't impacted as a result of you working from the office, from home, as an example. But setting, another one I would say is probably setting clear expectations, goals, priorities is key as well. And then how do you measure the achievements of those goals as well? Doing regular check-ins with the employees as well, that's important. Another one in that dimension is also bi-directional feedback, having those conversations on an ongoing basis. Transparency, I think, is really going to be key. This is brand new for a lot of people who haven't gone into the remote workforce kind of situation. So getting feedback from employees as to what is working, what's not working, and then continuously refining as you go forward, as you learn. I think that's going to be really interesting as well. So I think, just something that comes to mind is a Wall Street article. I actually read it over the weekend. Really interesting article. They cited that in some cases, remote workers are getting double employment. And that's getting double employment without each one of those employers knowing about the other employer that they're working for. They cited as an example software engineers as an example of somebody that's doing this. In fact, they put in, if you accumulate the two jobs, the number of hours they put in, they actually put in less than the standard 40 hours a day. So they're actually putting in less work, but they've got two jobs and two pays coming in. The interesting thing was also, and get this, this shocked the crap out of me, to be honest. There are actually guides in place as to how to live a secret double work life. That's just amazing. There's a lot of hints around this. One of them was, hey, have two laptops going. And they actually have two laptops going. You're plugged into two meetings at two different companies, and you're participating in both. And how do you do that effectively? Well, there's a guide for that. So it just blew me away. But, having clear goals, monitoring goal progress, right? Having that regular check-in and make sure that employees are engaged is fundamentally important. I think, if you go beyond that, you start seeing things like, encouraging people to be on video as an example, as much as they can. I think that helps a lot. How many times have we been on calls and somebody might not be on video and you called out their name and you don't get a response for a little while, right? And there's always exceptions in situations, but if it happens consistently, then it makes you wonder, are people engaged? So looking for hints like that as well are key. Another one that comes to mind is probably reducing collaboration barriers, because now you're going to have a mix, right? You'll have some in the office, you'll have some at home. And having collaboration tools in place to be able to support those conversations, unified conversations. But also, I think Marc mentioned this earlier, some teams are starting to look at and saying, you know what? We want to be in the office day 1, day 2, day 3. Pick up Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We'll be in the office or whatever days works for the teams, and then that allows them to connect at a human level. But it also allows them to collaborate, impromptu collaboration as well. And then the other 2 days they're working remotely and they're focused on getting certain tasks and activities done. Those are the ones that top of the mind that come to mind right now.
Yeah. I want to open this up to some questions from the audience for those tuning in. If you have questions, keep commenting, keep shouting out. We'll do our best to say hello, answer some questions, and do so in the remainder of our time. We do have a shout out from Sean in New Hampshire, and I want to get your guys' reaction to this. He says he feels it's tough for the in-office team to remain connected to the full remote workforce and feel like one team. And Hanif, you were just kind of mentioning that connectedness and that sort of thing. But what are some other, either of you, hints or ideas about, how people can feel, you feel like maybe if you're remote, you feel like, oh man, they're having such a good time in the office. Maybe you need somebody who has some expertise on the remote side. How do you build that cohesion better?
Yeah, I've seen a couple of things that happen, and it supplements that as well. So I've seen some situations where, aside from, the weekly kind of sync up kind of thing on site, I've seen people say, "Hey, let's move to a quarterly sync up as opposed to a weekly sync up." So there's different schedules that people are looking at. That's one. I think on the collaboration tool, just coming back to that, I personally think there's going to be a significant amount of innovation in this space that needs to come through, because as you're collaborating with people, and like was just said, you've got some in the office, some at home. One of the things is, hey, everybody's got to stay on video, even in the office. So maybe let's say you're using a collaboration platform or a video platform, whatever you choose to use. But in that sense, I've seen some teams say, I've got to log into that. Even if I'm in the conference room, I still log into that from my desktop. So everybody around is connected directly to the same tool, so that you don't walk away and all of a sudden go to the whiteboard and start chalking something else, because you're conscious of it, because you're logged in and they're seeing you on the camera as well at the same time. So I think people are applying different kinds of techniques around that.
Yeah. Marc, one of the things that I think is going to become really important, maybe probably already is important, is measuring the success of productivity, performance management in a hybrid workforce. Do you have some thoughts or tips around that?
Yeah, I've been a manager and a remote worker, a manager of hybrid teams and a remote worker for about the past 10 years. So success, it goes back to managing by goals and objectives. Like Hanif had said, it's really important when you're not in the same space with your teams every day, that at least you understand what the work is. And I've always adopted a philosophy of, as long as the work gets done, it doesn't matter when or where you are. And I think that's worked really well with the teams and for myself. And I also think that, other productivity measurements are still going to be there. Senior leaders, executive leaders are going to still be looking at sales, profits, customer satisfaction, all those traditional success metrics. But when it comes down to productivity, you got to look at, are people getting the work done on time? What's the quality of the work, and measure to those things so that they continue to stay not only connected to the work, but also to their colleagues through the ways that Hanif mentioned. Video conferencing is probably here to stay. But I also think an old-fashioned phone call can just go a long way just to connect with people as well.
Yeah, I think it probably will be hard to prove your productivity if you're working those two jobs, as Hanif was talking about from that Wall Street Journal article. Hanif, are there some cost implications of a hybrid workforce?
Yeah, there probably are, and there's probably multiple dimensions that these cost implications come from. So I think one would be certainly from the employer's dimension. From the employer's dimension, there is cost savings potentially there as well. So, you may be able to reduce, as an example, your office space, your real estate requirements may get reduced. And obviously from that, there's a significant financial benefit that could come out of that. I think the other ones could be, and this is dependent on the companies as well, and the industries to some degree. So fringe benefits like cafeterias, some companies pay for employees' lunch, as an example, or subsidize it, free sodas, coffees, whatever else, right? So there may be some potential savings from that. I think there's also a bigger one might be recruiting costs could significantly go down. So now once companies are comfortable that, hey, this hybrid thing is working, and they can go out and get remote workforces, then, it opens up the market. Your talent pool expands nationally, if not internationally. And you could go hire people from lower cost centers from where you are. So it could make a significant difference from that perspective, at least from an employer standpoint. And those are just some, but there's also a flip side to it. Excuse me. And the flip side to it is that could be an increase in costs. And there's various dimensions of that too. So one could be, as an example, if you don't have a video conferencing infrastructure in place, people don't have the right laptops that support collaboration and video conferencing and so forth. There may be some expenditure in those cases as well. I tend to think maybe also travel. So, I mentioned before that sometimes you might want to say, okay, look, a lot of people are working remotely, but we're going to get together on a quarterly basis or a 6-month basis, and everybody's going to come together in this one location, which means you're going to fly people in potentially and so forth. So depending on how you do it and what your patterns in travel are and the business that you're in, you could see an uptick in terms of travel expenditure as well. And then, even on the other dimension, there could be just operational costs. If the company decides that they want to sanitize each workstation, and I'm stretching it a bit, but let's say they want to sanitize each workstation every night, there's going to be costs associated to that as well. From the employee side, and we're all employees, so from an employee's perspective, you could save significantly on commuting costs. I moved from the San Francisco Bay Area, where my commute was about an hour and a half one way, to now I live in Fort Lauderdale. So significant change in commuting. And it's not just necessarily the cost, it's the time. For me, it was 3 hours a day spent in commuting. That's a lot. And then people can have childcare costs and so forth that they could save on as well.
So let me get this straight. You went from an hour and a half drive to a 3,000 mile drive? Don't answer that. We actually have another question from Hamza, who this is kind of interesting. Asks, what's the most critical and successful way of job hunting these days? How could you have an edge on your competitors? So kind of seeing maybe, Marc, through the lens of this hybrid workforce, what are some things that might be changing around recruiting, and if you're somebody looking for a job or keeping job options open, how does this change the game there?
Well, I think it can give the employer a competitive advantage in terms of offering that flexibility. I mean, there will be some companies who will not adopt a remote or a hybrid workforce. And I think those that can offer the flexibility for those that need it. I mean, there's still a good subsegment of the workforce who really just wants to go into an office every day. But if you're the person who wants that type of flexibility, I think it gives you a lot of different options. And I think it could give the employer a competitive advantage to strengthen their employer brand as a place that they want people to come to work under their set of guidelines for what hybrid working means to them.
Yep.
Yeah, I wonder also, Marc, I wonder if we might see even more postings in sense of, because they're considering, a company wasn't considering hybrid jobs before, and now because they're moving from on-site to hybrid, potentially you could see more jobs in the marketplace as well from that perspective. Whereas before it was just it had to be located in this particular area, and now it's opening up. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there as well.
Well, guys, that's all we have time for today. We do a few other questions came in here at the very end, and Hanif and Marc will try to respond shortly on LinkedIn to those questions. So thanks for sending them in. Marc and Hanif, thank you so much for joining us.
Our pleasure.
Thank you, Fritz.
Thanks for having us.
As always, a big thanks to all of you for tuning in. We'll be back with Marc and Hanif again next week to dive deeper into a topic you all asked a lot about today, managing the productivity of a hybrid workforce, what to look out for, new skills that managers need to make it successful, and how to set effective goals around it. One of our favorite topics, productivity, performance management. That is happening on Tuesday, August 24th at 11:30 a.m. Pacific time. We will see you then.